we're going to move on to the panel session. So I'd like to invite David House from Santander, Rob Stevens from Nationwide, Richard Fisk from Legal and General Surveying Services, and Lynn Hawkins from KFH to come to the front, please. So our first polling question was, how important do you see data in the valuation process? So we've got 9, I'm a lender, very important. 14, I'm a surveyor, very important. And 2, I'm a surveyor, not at all. So clearly there's a couple of maybe some mistyping maybe.
You mentioned, Graham, this is how we're going to determine our panels going forward. So Dave and I have been chatting. So we now know we've locked in who's not going to be doing this. I'm going to have a chat with you at the back at the end.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess, clearly data's important. But I think it'd be interesting to hear from your perspective in terms of why you think it's important and how you think it can potentially improve the valuation process. David, do you want
me?
Yeah.
So I suppose I started using data in the valuation process 10 years ago next month. And that was because we introduced automated valuations on purchase. And for that reason, being purchase, up till then we'd always used AVMs on property that the customer owned or was already on our book. But with purchase, there was a risk that our customer didn't know much about the property, and it was going to be new, possibly, as a charged property. The remortgages, they tended to have had a mortgage before. So we introduced flood and ground stability. Mm-hmm. And then over the period since then, that's expanded into coastal, then about the built environment, then about legal leases, etc., then into EPC and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And that's absolutely essential for AVMs because no human being is visiting, and that you cannot value remotely without data. But of course, what's happened since then is the whole rise of climate change, transitional risk, and therefore valuers need to be aware of data items in order to value correctly. And also efficiency. I'm going to steal some of Rob's thunder here, so I'm going to let Rob finish off on that because I know he wants to talk about making assumptions. And if I say it all, he won't be able to say his bit. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
I'll leave it. Yeah. Well, that's where I've used data. But when you get to surveyors, I know because I've talked to Rob about this. There's about assumptions being made rather than working from knowledge.
So I guess a similar journey to David on this one. I wasn't going to try and one up him and say I think it's 11 years since we've started. So. But we're using a lot of the same data, again, in relation to the AVMs and how you can use them in a safe way and where are the places which the risk is the smallest. I guess there's this kind of balancing act, though, that's from a lender perspective. We still have to kind of think about the customer in that journey. And we can't assume that the customer understands and is knowledgeable about a number of these topics. Which kind of leads you to the point around there's a lender risk decision, but there's also then a consumer and should they get a survey and all these other things, which are kind of is a slightly different topic. But the whole point for me is, as a lender, we can make these decisions, but as David kind of alluded to, what we don't want is just to say we're not going to do an AVM because of X, Y, and Z, and then we send a valuer out there who makes an assumption, and then you're no further forward than you would have been anyway, and you still end up with all of the PVQs. And if I was to think about my morning before I came here, I was probably dealing with half a dozen cases where people were meant to be completing on Friday, and there was loads of issues that have been raised at the 11th hour in relation to things that potentially a surveyor could have known if they'd have had better data. Yeah. So it's that data flow, but it's not just having that data, it's the provenance of that data and knowing it's correct. Yeah. Because you can take information from a broker, but unfortunately a lot of times that won't necessarily be correct. The number of times we see a broker input a lease term, it's always 99 years. Yep. in fact, the case this morning I was looking at, I think the broker put it was 99 years, the surveyor said it was 980 years. So there's a range there. And so ensuring that data is correct, but also ensuring that the valuer knows what to do with it, so not making an assumption. So I've always said, potentially you can give a valuer some data to say there's a flood risk, and all you get back is a valuation report that says there's a risk of flooding. So it's not just arming people with the data, it's arming them with the tools to know how to interpret it and how to use it. So actually,
and what you need them to do. That's the interesting thing for me as a relative newcomer. I mean, I have been in the industry, not valuations, but as a relative newcomer to valuations, the interesting thing that's always on my mind is the more data we get access to and the more data we share, the more responsibility comes with that. So to your point, you know, what do you expect a surveyor valuer to do when you're sending this data through as part of the instruction?
Well, we're not necessarily sending data through. So, for instance, Santander uses Countrywide and ESER predominantly, but they source their own data.
Yeah.
So one of the issues I have at the moment is, and this can happen, is that different organisations have a different view of the data they use. So sometimes we might flag for flood and Countrywide don't, or vice versa. I've even had a situation where we don't flag for coastal, but the surveyor has, because the basis upon which we use the data, which we source from Landmark, is we look at a different management regime for coastal erosion. Yeah. And the surveying firm uses coastal erosion data with a different rule set. So that's one of the issues I have at the moment, is trying to determine a consistency. Where does the risk lie and which rule set is the best use? So we don't, others could be different, but we don't send the data to the valuers source the data for themselves, except the two at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whoever they are.
Two at the end.
But
and so Richard and Lynn, what's your sort of perspective on the importance of data?
Shall I go? So we've been using data for 12 years now.
I should never have said.
It's becoming more and more important. I agree with what David's just said. It's not shared very easily at all in many occasions. Data is only as good as the accuracy of it. I think we're all making somebody very rich and probably all buying bits of data multiple times. Lenders are buying it, conveyancers are buying it. We're certainly buying it more and more. So the whole concept of sharing data has got to be the way forward. I think I was a person that you were quoting earlier of put everything in the box and let's share it, please. One version of the truth has absolutely got to be the way. Yet data is becoming more and more important in terms of the valuation methodology that we use, particularly with customers where we work with them on AVMs and do desktop valuations. You've got to have accurate data, and there's a clear trend of more and more valuations. The valuation methodology being an AVM or a DV. So hugely important. It's getting more and more. I think the trick is how you are going to take data at asset level, combine it with a risk appetite of a lender.
We have business as usual valuation process and the data that's in that. And then we have the data our valuation suppliers are using. And I need to join it all up because they're not always consistent. It's not that they're wrong, it's just that they've got a different basis for deriving an answer to that question, and far more sophisticated than I think you'll ever get in the material information answer. It's too complex, I think. Not all of it, but some of it is too complex for that.
Yeah. I think it all depends how material information evolves. The principle is good. The issue is going to be, as David said, the provenance of it and who actually is completing it. If we start to see a swing where people are instructing conveyancers prior to properties being put on the market, and that data is from a trusted source, then I can see a flow. I think it's going to take time, having worked on that project, to get the information flowing from the estate agents, CRMs, all the way through to being in a consumable format for lenders and others. Yeah. But if you were to kind of setting out a holy grail, you could see a scenario where that information has been checked and come from a seller's solicitor's conveyancer, and it then flows through into a lender and a surveyor. I think the other point that we haven't touched upon yet, and we may get to in future questions, it's not just sharing data between the lender and the surveyor, yeah. It's also the conveyancer, because this is kind of a triangle. Yeah. And you need to make sure that all parties, otherwise you do a great piece of work to get it to offer really quickly, and then the conveyancer starting from scratch, so you end up, that's why you've got your lead period of, it might get to offer in 4 days, but it still takes 28 weeks to complete. Exactly. Because they're starting from scratch with none of the information. So I think we just kind of need to look at how that data flows all the way through, so you end up with the right data at the right party at the right time. Yeah, yeah.
Just to pick up on one point, and I think David and Rob, you both mentioned this, the piece around credible data. How do you know data is credible? There's a lot of data suppliers out there, a ton in actual fact. How do you go about making that choice? How do you decide what is credible and what's not?
I suppose in this forum I should say you buy it from Landmark. Is that
well, I wasn't going to say that. That wasn't a setup.
I think from our perspective, obviously we go through our own process of validation. There's elements which, you know, it's quite clean cut, it's quite straightforward. If you're getting information from the land registry on the title, etc., it's pretty easy. I think it's more complicated when you come to things like environmental and flood data, where there's elements of models involved and variances. So you could probably take one property and run it through 10 different flood models and get slightly different outputs. Yeah. So I think that's more the challenging piece, where there's elements of subjectivity of data compared to what I would call binary baseline, which is pretty straightforward. The same with an AVM and also evaluation. Yeah. I mean, you could turn around and say, if you were to send 10 valuers to one property and they didn't have the answer, how many different variances would you get back there? So they're all the challenges of that provenance of data.
Yeah. And what about getting just off piste a little bit? But I was thinking, when we were talking about that, I was thinking about PVQs, and we know you've just mentioned actually the average turnaround time for evaluation is about 4.5-5 days. So to your point, the problem isn't in that, but problems do come after the fact in terms of PVQs. From a surveyor perspective, how do you think? Because you're carrying that overhead. So from that perspective, how could data potentially eliminate some of those issues, if at all?
Well, it's having the amount of data up front. As you said, the credible data, because the thing is, once the surveyor's been out, he's signed that job off, it's gone. So then to start getting a PVQ afterwards, they've got other valuations that they've been out to as well. So it's almost like you need it, that case is finished as far as they're concerned. Yes, there'll always be something that will come up later on down the line, that maybe nobody's sort of thought of beforehand. But actually, I think if you have the amount of data up front, everybody's, can have that data, then yes, it will actually.
Some things can be avoidable.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think in your opening presentation, you said something along the lines of, all of us in this room aren't creating the problem of the length of time from instruction to completion. Yeah. But, when I look at, sort of colleagues around, my God, do we have a big cost in what happens after we've done our job. And, and PVQs are one of them. I mean, we've got PVQ teams, haven't we? And, they're not cheap. So from my point of view, I think data is part of the answer, but again, it comes, if you can get this grey box or white circle, whatever it is now working, just join us up. My background is lending and credit risk, And I still don't think you guys might be better at it, but generally the industry doesn't sort of tie up the instructions that we have as valuers to do a job and make assumptions, and what conveyancers are told in their lending handbook of what assumptions they should make. So the amount of PVQs that we get where a conveyancer, we assume it's 85 years and they say it's not 85, it's 84, but just tell us both. If it's over 80, it's okay. We should tie that sort of stuff up. And I think the only system that you've got in terms of conveyancing is the kind of registration system that does the due diligence on conveyancers. There's no system that links conveyancers up directly with a surveyor and joining those policies up. I think that would be a huge win. So data important, yes, but there's other things we can do as well.
Yeah. Okay, good. We have another question, I think, Abby. What technology, right, this is an interesting one. What technology enhancements do you think will have the biggest impact on valuation in the next 5 years? AI, image recognition, good proportion there. AI, large language models like ChatGPT. 7, AI, robotic processes, so automation, e.g. Power Automate. 8, virtual reality, so the idea that you can put the old
and with the human being, for me in L&G, that's the secret. It's combining those three things. Just data on its own doesn't really give you. It will never give you all of the answers. It's how you combine it with those two other things.
Okay, Lynn, what's your perspective?
Yeah, no, I actually agree with Richard, to be honest, and the other two. Having data is important for us. We have actually been doing, because of the amount of, I suppose, desktops and AVMs that are being done now, we actually started looking at leasehold property some years ago. I don't think it's 13 years.
Should have been just 15.
I thought you were going to say 15.
So, and, we realise now that obviously a lot more of the valuations that we get are more complex. And, having that information up front is vital. Yeah. We tend to do a lot of that in head office. Yeah. So we actually get the leasehold data and everything. And again, what Richard mentioned, we're actually paying for the lease to be downloaded, and I know the lenders are. So, it's just...
Isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, very interesting.
Try and move on to the next one.
Yeah, should we move on to the next question, please, Abby? So to what extent do you use data at the moment in your current process? Well, I think we kind of answered that as a panel, but I'm a lender a lot, three people. I'm a lender not as much as I think we could, 6. I'm a lender not at all, that's good, I think. I'm a surveyor a lot. I'm a surveyor not as much as I think we could, 6, and I'm a surveyor not at all. So I think really positive.
It shows there's 2 surveyors who are using it who don't think they should be.
Yeah. So I think really positive results there, Mike, and I think that's what we would expect to see. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Next question, please, Abby. How do you intend this to change in the next 12 to 24 months? So 3 people said, I'm a lender, partial increase. 7 people said, I'm a lender, significant increase. 2 people, I'm a surveyor, the same or less. 6 people said, I'm a surveyor, partial increase. And again, 7 surveyors with significant increase. So clearly the trend, Mike, is for more use of data to inform the risk and the valuation process. Does that concur with what you would expect to see?
Can I ask a question on this one? Just throw in. On material information, so Part B and C material information, where estate agents are needing to advertise more insight with a property, do you see that as being one of the drivers for a significant increase in data, which is the most popular answer we've had?
I'm not so sure, not from the valuation process. Rob used the word provenance, and that's right. You know, you use data when you are sure that the data is accurate. And also, if you ask somebody, is the area prone to flood? That's such a binary yes-no answer when there's so much flood data around. Similar with ground stability and, like I say, coastal erosion. So I think in the valuation process, certainly for me, I think it's true for the others, you make your own decisions about what is significant and use your own data. So I think there's a provenance thing there. I think what will happen, because I'm doing it at the moment over the next 12 months or so, is to more sophistication. And I alluded to it before. We have climate change reports and the data that's used in those.
Apple Vision goggles on. And drones. So nobody thinks drones could have an impact on valuation. Me and Mike were really keen on drones, but
That's just because we want one to play with.
yeah. And two people said continued mobile enhancements, e.g. LiDAR on the iPhone. But clearly there's a swing towards what AI can potentially do in the future. And, I'm sure everybody in this room is thinking about AI and how that can potentially help our businesses moving forward. Do you have anything to add on that, Mike, your sort of interpretation? Or?
It doesn't surprise me that AI was the winner. I actually think my personal view is that there'll be a combination of multiple. So it's a slightly unfair question, I suspect, which might come across as why the answer's pretty evenly spread. But I can see all types of AI having use cases for all businesses. You know, the RPA being efficiencies in kind of back office and manual processing, but image recognition in recognizing defects or invasive species and things like that.
Do you think we'll ever get to that point where AI could potentially recognize photographs within a property and say, well, actually, this property is built of this material, it's got this roof, there's damp on that wall. Do you think we'll ever get to that point? Will AI deliver that solution, do you think?
There's already technology through computer vision which can scan listings imagery and give you a reasonable breakdown. So I wouldn't say you'd use it for binary decisions, but from a triage perspective, you can already do that to kind of go, well, this property might be suitable for a desktop or this one wouldn't be, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. I think probably AI, I think, will be used best in relation to taking jargon and turning it into consumer-friendly wording. Yeah. So whether that be in the survey world or in the conveyancing space, to actually turn around and say, right, here's a lease, let's turn this into something that you can understand. Or if a surveyor's been out there and they've picked up damp or whatever, they can use their language and just get it turned into something that a consumer might understand. So I think that potentially is where it's going to have some good use as well.
Yeah. So all those documents can be fed into a large language model. They can be interpreted and summarised.
As much as anything, it's about kind of having a property logbook, isn't it? Yeah. Because ultimately, somebody can apply to Nationwide for a mortgage and it then be declined or then decide not to proceed. A week later, they can apply to David and Santander. We'll both do the same checks virtually within different risk appetites, but we'll pay for one set of data and use that, and you'll do something completely different. For me, it's that data repository of having that in one place where we can kind of go, David can go, well, Nationwide did that 2 weeks ago. Here's all the attributes that were collected. We can use those because he's comfortable with the provenance of that data. Now, whether AI is used to help define elements of that can be, but I think that's where the big win is. At the moment, we just start from scratch over and over again. And even when a property is sold, so someone can be in a property for 5 years, or even two 5 years remortgage, that information could be reused for the next transaction. Mm-hmm. Whereas at the moment, again, we just start from scratch. Yeah. And that way, the conveyancer wouldn't have to be asking all of those questions to you don't want to answer because you know the information. It's more of a what's changed in the last 5 years as opposed to 1,000 questions that you answer time and time again.
Yeah. And I'm still interested in drones. Sorry, Lynn and Richard. Do you ever see a time where a drone could go into a property and do some kind of, baseline survey?
Imaging from the homeowner, for further advances has got to be an obvious solution. So drones, I think we could thought about it for kind of new build developments on how they're developing. There's it's not too expensive. It's a couple of £1,000s now to get a drone license. So the whole thing is not expensive. There's lots of people that do it. So I think there is a user case. I'm just not sure we've established it between lenders and surveyors. For consumers, I think it's before we start talking about drones, let's get consumers understanding the difference between a survey and a valuation. It's baby steps. But going back to the point on AI, I would love it if there was something that a consumer buying a house could, walk around the property with some sort of device and recognise there's the damp on the wall and give us that imagery and give it to a professional person to give an opinion. That can't be beyond the wit of man. So perhaps drones per se, I'm not sure, but that sort of technology to help consumers definitely.
Sounds like we sort of fix the basics first.
Yeah, I did a broker session a couple of months ago, and I started off with a difference between a valuation and a survey, and we're all to blame. We are all to blame. We call it a lender survey, a lender valuation, a home buyers, a building survey, a structural survey. No wonder consumers are confused. So they probably just think, I don't understand it, I won't bother. But the more and more we do AVMs and desktops on purchases. Somebody somewhere with consumer duty in mind has got to start suggesting that consumers get surveys. I think you still promote them, don't you?
Yeah, most definitely. We find pretty good penetration for our branch network with surveys. But the take up, all in all, is still not massive.
It's like 1 in 10, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't believe that research. I don't know who did it.
Quoting Mr. Cumber. All right, so we'll move on. I think our final question, please, Abby. Oh, was that the end? I thought we had one on the material information, but we kind of covered that,
yeah,
didn't we?
Yeah, through that.
Well, that's it. So, yeah, thank you. A big thank you to our panellists. Hope you found that interesting, getting their insights and experience. Oh. Well, we did have a question on material information. Hey, right. So, how aware are you of the parts B and C material information requirements? We touched on it a little bit. I'm a lender. I don't know and I don't care. 3.
Those 3 people want to identify themselves.
I'm a lender, I'm aware, but not changed anything as a result. 4, I'm a lender, I'm aware, and have or are planning to implement changes. 2, I'm a surveyor, I don't know and don't care. I'm a surveyor, I'm aware, but not changed anything as a result. 8 people, and 2 people said I'm a surveyor, I'm aware, and have or are planning to implement changes. Mike, does that surprise you?
Yes. Yeah, I think they are well publicised. You can't open the trade press without some kind of mention to them. There's a lot of devil in the detail, and I think, to Rob's point, a lot of that's still to come out. I think until trading standards start to haul some agents over the coals, we won't see a huge amount of change, and then that action will then mean that more agents adhere to them, and then that action will mean that the kind of follow-on stuff can come as a result. So it's at the very beginning, but it does surprise me that certainly the don't knows a little bit
Yeah. Maybe that's to your point, it's because there aren't any consequences.
Maybe it's they thought that this question wasn't there because I forgot that it was.
Yeah. Rob, I saw a bit of breathing going on there. Do you have a view on this?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it kind of links back to if you're a surveyor and you think the red book assumption around a knowledgeable buyer. To me, the information that's provided at listing underpins that.
Yeah.
And these changes would fundamentally then impact what your assumptions are around what a knowledgeable buyer is, around what information they've been given. So I think for those who are saying don't know, don't care, I think that might be a problem in the future. Because I think we are going to have to care about this information unless we're willing to continue from an assumption perspective. I don't see how you can make an assumption when there's information that's been given to a consumer about a property and you just want to choose to ignore it.
Yeah. Presumably, though, this information captured as early on in the process as possible by the agents or anybody else involved, and it being credible is going to be useful and helpful.
Well, I think the other thing is that we're starting to see now more cases where people who aren't disclosing information, whether it be something like Japanese knotweed or anything, or any flooding, etc., there's more cases that's now starting to go through the courts where people are being sued for not providing or knowingly.
There was one the other day on Japanese knotweed.
There was a
Yeah.
I think there'll be more cases where people don't disclose information and there then turns to be a loss or an impact on value, they'll be sued. So I think it's a combination of two things. It's, as Mike said, the agents being hauled across the coals, but also consumers starting to understand that you can't just lie about this stuff and hide it and hope you get away with it.
Over half of the owner-occupiers in this country don't have a mortgage. And Rob and I are talking about data and how we use it. But I don't know. Do you know, Mike, what percentage of people buying a house next year won't actually require a mortgage? They just pay cash.
The long run's about 30%, isn't it? But I suspect it's higher. There's such a lag on land registration.
So
it's hard to work out.
we're not the solution to people being informed. All people being informed.
Yeah, that's true.
They've got to.
That's a really good point.
I think it's about 40%. I think it was the latest.
Really?
For cash.
So they've got to be educated somewhere.
So the private survey.
Yeah.
I think it's down to a lot of the estate agents. I think they need to have that, I suppose, education in terms of, the fact is a lender may not send a valuer, so there's no professional actually looking at that property. So, it's really, whereas, we've got a big estate agency chain, and, surveyors and estate agents have never typically got on. We've now, over the years, managed to sort of bridge that gap with our own. And actually now we start to get, we have been getting a lot more referrals coming through. They're not really afraid of it now. And it's just basically, it's information for that purchaser.
Excellent. Okay. I think that was our final question. Well, so that's our final question. And thank you so much to our panel guests for taking part in that. I hope you all found it insightful and certainly some things to learn from some of those answers as well. So thank you very much. Greatly appreciated.